all the people that work at Picturehouse sort of say, okay, well, this show does particularly well for this audience. We can play it at 9:00 on a Tuesday night and it'll get 40 people in or 30 people in, and that's worth it. And so you can be much more able to keep films on, which we do. We're very much about letting films breathe and not just taking them off if they're working, and to find a way where you can thread them through all the other films.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Aria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. Here in our second episode of our CineEurope 2024 series, brought to you by TAPOS by Jack Rowe, Cinity by Christie, and ICE Theaters. You can learn a lot more about the event happening right now in Barcelona on our website, boxofficepro.com, or if you are in Barcelona, pick up a copy of Box Office Pro magazine. You'll be able to find a picture of the ICE Theaters auditorium concept on the cover page. If you're not in Barcelona, you should be getting that magazine over in your office or wherever you subscribe in the US and Canada. Very exciting event here in Spain, going over the entirety of European exhibition. We'll be going into more detail on that later, especially in our feature segment this week with my colleague Rebecca Pauley, deputy editor here at Box Office Pro, speaking to Clare Binns, the honoree of the Unique Achievement Award. She is the managing director at Picturehouse Cinemas and Picturehouse Entertainment, an extremely influential executive, very well known, very well liked here in this industry, talking everything on the specialty side of UK distribution and exhibition. That's coming up in our feature segment. And before that interview, Rebecca Pauley speaks with Alan Rowe, the CEO of Jack Rowe. That is going to be part of our sponsored segment for this week. And Rebecca, before we get started in this week's episode, unfortunately, we have to start with sad news. Early last week, before recording the episode that went out, we learned about the unexpected and unfortunate passing of George Roman, one of our closest industry colleagues here. Many of you know him as the head of NATO of Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula, known to a lot of people in this industry as a champion of independent exhibition based out of Rhinelander, Wisconsin. He continued operating hometown cinema there, something that his family had been in business with for years, and expanded his local entrepreneurship efforts to include local candy shop, even going as far as opening his own gelato store for a while. He would work weekends. I remember talking to him for many years. He would work in the cinema on Fridays, head over to do a wedding on Saturdays with his gelato carts, and back in the downtown of Rhinelander for the candy shop to close out on Sundays. Beloved figure in this industry. Rebecca, I know you also got to know him very well over the years.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that he would do all that you mentioned so enthusiastically and still at the same time, along with John Scaletta, run the Geneva Convention, which I know, Daniel, every time, we speak to people in the industry and the Geneva Convention comes up, it's always the word that comes up is family, always. It's a very intimate show. It's been one of the best on the show schedules, and that is in large part because of George and because he was just a very welcoming person and a hardworking person.
Our deepest condolences to the Roman family and to all of his colleagues in his extended family of theatrical exhibition and distribution as well. One of the most beloved figures, I think, in the little fishbowl of our industry here. We will miss him dearly. We do have to move on with the news because I want to keep this in George's memory. Delivering news that I think would make him smile, would give him a little jolt of excitement, because we are coming off of a very strong and successful opening weekend for Inside Out 2 from Disney Pixar, performance that a lot of us in the business were expecting to be the highest opening weekend of the year. That came to pass. Not all of us, but a vocal number of us, including Box Office Pro, were expecting this movie to be the first $100 million opener of 2024. That also came to pass, a fantastic overperformance on that film. I'll go into detail on that in the forecasting segment of this episode later on. But Rebecca, I know this is a title that was on your radar for a while. Were you a big fan of the first Inside Out?
I wasn't in particular, honestly, but I was at that point where I think I was just a little too old for it. And you know who I think went to see that movie and contribute to that gross? People who saw it when they were kids, and now they're Gen Z, Zoomers, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah,
It
they
really
aged into
connected
it,
across
right?
a lot of demographics. Yeah.
And then another major news, this actually came in an hour after we finished last week's episode, unfortunately. So if you listened to us last week, you might remember in the news segment, Rebecca Pauley putting a lot of confidence in Alamo Drafthouse after announcing that 6 of its franchisees' locations were closed due to a bankruptcy filing, telling everyone, hey, calm down. This isn't the end of the world. It's the franchisee. Alamo's fine. We recorded that episode. Shortly thereafter, after we finish it, we hear that the entirety of Alamo Drafthouse is
Woo!
sold. The circuit was for sale for a number of months now.
Yeah.
We expected a deal to come in, but it's actually a major studio, Sony Pictures Entertainment, stepping up and becoming the first studio after the repeal of the Paramount decree in 2020 to buy a top exhibition chain, Alamo Drafthouse being a top 15 circuit in North America, now operating under the auspices of Sony Pictures Entertainment. Now, we have to bring a caveat here, an asterisk. Just because the Paramount decree was in place doesn't mean we haven't had movie theaters being operated by studios. There's a couple of exceptions here.
To paraphrase the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, they had become over the decades, I think, more guidelines than rules. Sony.
Yeah.
The Paramount decrees did not apply to Sony in the first place, didn't apply to Disney, didn't apply to, say, a streamer like Netflix, which has taken up theaters in Los Angeles and New York City, though obviously nothing like the chain purchase that we are seeing here. We've seen it, as you mentioned, kind of one-off theaters here and there being purchased. But just to dive a little bit more into what this purchase looks like. So Sony actually has a division of their company that's called Sony Pictures Experiences. I wasn't Alamo's CEO, Michael Kusterman, will continue on as the CEO under the auspices of Sony Pictures Entertainment. Sony Pictures Entertainment has also acquired the incredibly popular genre film festival Fantastic Fest, which has been run by Alamo Drafthouse and will continue to be run by Alamo Drafthouse. It's been, I think, an eventful few years for the company, as it has been for the entire industry. I think over the past handful of years, they've entered Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They've come out of it. They have had 2 new CEOs since 2020. But I think it's an interesting, I mean, anybody who tells you that they know what this acquisition is going to look like is telling tales out of school. We don't know what this looks like yet. We don't know the effect that this is going to have. But it seems like a good fit. I mean, if you look at Sony, an entertainment division, I mean, that's a big part of what Alamo is. They've always had that kind of immersive vibe to them, whether that's, special menu items or the custom designed lobbies. It's something that seems surprising, but then when you think about it a bit, it makes sense.
It makes total sense in terms of Sony probably being the only major studio to go out and acquire a major circuit today. And I mean major in the sense that it's not a top 5, but it is top 15. It has a national footprint. But of course, you're not going into acquiring, let's say, someone like Regal or AMC, which is a different beast altogether. So it's an example here where Sony is acquiring a circuit to get into the motion picture exhibition space. And Sony as a company isn't a stranger to this. So we have to remember that Sony operated as the parent company of Lowe's for many years. I think it was like 25 years of ownership from the late 80s to the early 2000s, where Sony was involved in exhibition. So it wasn't a company that was completely outside of the picture. We did have something called Sony Theaters in the mid 90s for a couple of years, right? Those theaters eventually rebranded. The Alamo Drafthouse brand in itself is going to be retained. So Sony isn't going to be saying, Alamo by Sony or Sony's Drafthouse, anything like that.
The main top 5 reasons why it was an attractive acquisition for Sony. The fact that it does have a strong brand, it does have a strong following. We said it time and time again that in terms of theater chains in North America, branding and marketing, Alamo's up there with the best of them, if not the best of them.
I would say it's a top cinema brand in the sense that it is able to resonate globally despite being a national circuit. Of course, when you talk about AMC, Cineworld, Regal, you're talking about even Cinepolis, right? CJCGV, you're talking about brands that are very different. These are multinationals. Alamo, 25 years ago, was started as a mom and pop theater by Tim Leake and his wife, Carrie, in Austin, Texas. It's grown to be a national circuit, I think really over a span of 15 years? It's become national.
It's been a large and I think very rapid expansion, over, looking at the context of it and putting things into scope, which I think was why, there were rumors, it turned out founded, that Alamo was up for sale. And I think people were maybe a little bit nervous that the chain might not continue to grow as it has been. Certainly you hear in last week's podcast about those 6 locations owned by a franchisee, not by the corporate Alamo, those closing. We will definitely keep on top of this story as it develops and as we find out more, because, Daniel, as you noted, I mean, the Paramount decree is certainly a part of this, but Sony was never beholden to the Paramount decree in the first place. So it's not like this is something that could never have happened before.
Yeah, I think, as you say, Rebecca, surprising in the context that it happens right now at this juncture of exhibition. I don't think too surprising, or if you told me which studio would go in and buy a top circuit,
it would
it's
be
probably going to be the
one
that doesn't have a streaming service, right? It's going to be the one that is most leveraged into making their films work theatrically. It's going to be the one with the longest theatrical exclusivity window. I think it's great that Alamo Drafthouse, a beloved brand in exhibition, if it had to sell, it sells to a studio that gave a movie like Anyone But You, an R-rated romantic comedy, which is an endangered species in this industry, gave that the exclusive play in theaters to make it into a modest-sized hit through the holiday season. I like this acquisition for what it means to the industry. And what that means is that there are players in this space willing to make that investment in the success of theatrical exhibition. There's been a lot of talk on, hey, is it going to be tech? Is it going to be every studio buying chains? I'm not sure we're there yet. I think this is really much a very individual case where it made sense for Sony as a studio and that made sense for Alamo Drafthouse as a circuit, which isn't at this point a multinational behemoth. It's not a giant acquisition that you're making, but it does have an acquisition. But it does have a sizable footprint here in the US. It is a national brand, and it is a brand that I think is instantly recognizable to moviegoers all across the country. We'll be continuing updating you on the progress of this story as it develops. At this point, it looks like the executive leadership currently at Alamo Drafthouse is going to remain in place, led by Michael Kusterman, the CEO. As I believe around last year, he stepped into the role.
Yes,
so
he was president before, so he definitely wasn't new to the company.
Absolutely. So I think it's the same people that were involved. I think right now you have a strong ownership in terms of Sony, as opposed to private equity, which was the former part of the former ownership group after the pandemic bankruptcy. Positive news, I think, for exhibition. And I just hope that we continue seeing investment from folks outside of the industry into the industry. And I have to tell you, Rebecca, I spent most of this year dreading news about Sony acquiring a company in this industry. I was dreading a Sony Paramount merger. Fortunately, the Sony acquisition that we are reporting on, I think, is going to be one for the positive impact on the industry. Now, I know that there are people concerned about, hey, with studio ownership of a theater chain, does that mean that this theater chain will be insular, that they might only release their own movies, that you won't be able to see something else?
And they did say in the press release that is not the case. Just, I mean, I know words are words, but even if they did do that, I believe the backlash would be insane. I think they know
Rebecca,
better.
Forget the backlash. Look at the business model. It just simply wouldn't be viable. Now, it's different if you have one location. Say if you go into a single screen,
if you're a Netflix buying the Paris,
if it's a Netflix buy or even a Disney buy with Al Capitan, right? If you're a historic single screen or a historic twin cinema in a major city, it makes sense that you go there and it's your showpiece theater, right? You showcase your films and it's there as a promotional vehicle. If you buy a chain of over 30 cinemas nationwide, you have to fill those screens with something. It's not going to be viable for one studio to close that up and say it's only my movies. That just would not work in any iteration of this industry today. So I am not concerned at all in the slightest about something insular happening from this partnership. I would be very surprised, very, very, very surprised if A, that ever happens, and B, if it does happen, it's a viable business model. I don't see that. Unless you're a studio that puts out 100 movies a year on your own, you cannot pull that off. And to suggest otherwise is deeply ignorant of where this industry is right now. It just would not work. So I'm looking forward to more partnerships. I think I'm looking for maybe increased visibility on Sony's releases, experiences at Alamo locations. But to give you a comparison, National Amusements, the parent company of Paramount, is also the parent company of Showcase Cinemas. I think it's going to be something closer to that model, right? There is let's say they're cousin companies, not even sister companies, cousin companies, Showcase and Paramount. I think it's going to be a very similar relationship between Alamo and Sony. There's a connection there on the corporate side. There are synergies, but I don't think it's going to radically change the way that movie theater experience works. And we'll be going over more updates on that acquisition in the coming weeks and months as we get more information on that new Sony Alamo, not even partnership, acquisition. But let's move forward now to our forecasting segment where we look at what's happening next weekend at the movies.
We are witnessing a growing trend of audiences seeking premium large format auditoriums. As directors experiment with new visual storytelling techniques, moviegoers want to experience what's next. 3D, 4K, 120 FPS high frame rate is just the beginning. Cinity, the newest PLF system, delivers a wide color gamut, ultra-high brightness, and high dynamic range combined with immersive audio that launches your audience into the story. With a steady stream of Cinity formatted content in the near future, be sure to find out more at cinity2infinity.com.
And we are back here on the Box Office Podcast for our forecasting segment. I am in Barcelona right now as we record this from the trade show floor, if you hear a little bit of chatter in the background. But over in the Denver metro area, we've got our colleague Chad Kennerk, staff writer here at Box Office Pro. Chad, how was your weekend? Did you get to catch Inside Out 2? Because it seems like most of the world was able to see it in theaters.
Yeah, it was great. I went to my friends at Metropolitan Theaters and saw it in IMAX. Really enjoyed it. I feel like Kelsey Mann was able to pick up right where Pete Docter left off and give us another great chapter in Riley's life. What were we looking at, Daniel, in terms of box office?
It was a fantastic opening weekend. I think this is old news by now, but old news this good is always worth repeating. We had a $295 million global opening weekend from Inside Out 2, with the big headline here, a $154.5 million domestic opening weekend, well above the benchmark set by the opening weekend of the last segment in this Inside Out series, which opened to $90 million back, I believe, was 2015. Yeah. So almost a decade ago, 90 million. Post-pandemic, decade later, 154.5. I'll take that. It was good enough for the highest domestic opening weekend of the year by quite a margin. The last record holder was Dune 2 with an $82.5 million launch here in North America. Inside Out 2, Chad, what can I tell you? Breaking every sort of expectation that we had going into the weekend. In last week's episode, you heard me and Romeo Duchesne go over a ceiling of expectations closer to Toy Story 4's opening weekend back in 2019 of 120 million. Yeah, that flew out the door. Blew through the $150 million benchmark. And I got to tell you, Chad, this thing looks like it's going to keep on earning going into weekend 2 of its release. No real competition in the marketplace. We're expecting Inside Out 2 to gross anywhere between $75 and $85 million in North America in this frame. Another easy number 1 finish, a finish that we expect could very possibly be a hold above 50%, which would be incredible for a title like this. And continuing that forward momentum in the box office, second place, we're expecting Bad Boys Ride or Die to come in over its third frame with a hold between 15 and 18 million. Solid second place finish. And rounding out our top three in this forecasting podium, new release here from Focus Features, film from Jeff Nichols that I know you and I have been very much looking forward to, The Bike Riders. We're expecting that to open between 7 and 12 million here in the market. I think a more modest debut, but of course it's a different film altogether, one that will add a good amount of diversity and that will be a welcome inclusion for our colleagues in the art house space.
Yeah, I'm actually going to a press screening tonight. I'm really excited to see this.
I can't wait to get back to New York and see it myself. Really, really looking forward to. As we went over, the history of this movie is difficult in the sense that it debuted in Telluride. The Telluride Film Festival last year, was supposed to hit theaters from Searchlight in November of 2023. Actor strike made promoting an ensemble drama very difficult, obviously. So it goes back into the market. Focus Features picks it up. Now it's getting released in a midsummer frame. Maybe an award season play, a little bit early for that into the year. But like we were saying, just a welcome inclusion into the 2024 slate. I can't wait. A more adult demo, it has to be said, Chad. Of course, we're looking at the splits here on the demographics. Inside Out 2, as Rebecca and Alex Del Vecchio from Rutgers Cinema were sharing a couple of weeks ago on our podcast, coming into that opening weekend with the 18 to 34 age range representing 37% of that demo. An incredible overperformance from that Gen Z generation, young adults coming in on the nostalgia factor, over-indexing on Inside Out 2. We expect that to continue. Adult demos have it covered with The Bike Riders this weekend. And of course, action audiences have a lot to look forward to once again returning to Bad Boys Ride or Die. And that about does it for our forecasting segment this week. Chad, thanks for joining me on this. Coming up next, we've got a message from one of our sponsors, and then you'll be hearing from Alan Rowe, CEO of Jack Rowe, in this week's sponsored segment at the Box Office Podcast. And then closing out the episode, you will also hear from Clare Binns, Managing Director of Picturehouse Entertainment and Picturehouse Cinemas over in the UK. That is coming up right after this break.
As a cinema, it's frustrating when your success is decided by things you can't control. Hollywood hits come and go. What stays the same are the amazing experiences you offer your customers. Whether it's an engaging and successful membership program, seamless seat upgrades, next-level food and drink, or extras like arcade games and bowling. But to do this well, you need a POS system that can keep up. TAPOS has been developing cinema software for over 25 years. They know what it takes to run a successful movie theater, and they've created a solution that can match your boldest ambitions. Learn more at taposapp.com.
And we have now on the Box Office Podcast Alan Rowe, CEO of Jack Rowe, with their POS system, TAPOS by Jack Rowe. Alan, always great to have you here on the podcast. We last spoke to you as part of our CinemaCon series, speaking about all the varied ways that TAPOS by Jack Rowe can help cinemas accomplish a variety of things, from customer engagement to sales and beyond. How have you been since CinemaCon, I guess, personally, and what have you been thinking about? What are your thoughts about the few months that we've had in the industry since then?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. So, following CinemaCon, I went and did a bit of research. So I went and visited some customers and potential customers and so on, and visited different industries and so on around the world. I finally got back on the 26th of May. So my CinemaCon ended about 7 weeks after.
Oh, that was a long CinemaCon.
I assume I got the... I think I should get a prize for being the last one to get home following CinemaCon. But so I visited all kinds of circuits, single screen cinemas, and not just cinemas either, but other businesses. And, the conclusion is definitely, cinema is definitely not dead. It's definitely not dying. The biggest sort of takeaway, I think, is that problems in general always seem to be unique to ourselves. So I have my problems and maybe family problems and company problems and industry problems, and they all seem to be quite specific to me and my life and so on. Whereas the reality is, I think most of the problems we all have are just sort of specific cases of general problems. that have been seen elsewhere. So I always like to look outside of the cinema industry and see, what's happened there. And I think, we have seen this sort of tailing off of interest, I think, in Hollywood films, that you say this year for a number of reasons. And part of that, I think, is what's been seen in other industries. When you look at, say, beer is the one I always think of. When in the 80s and 90s, people really wanted lots of cheap beer. And people went, you know what, I've had enough pints of insert generic beer name here. I want something that's a bit different. And so now then you have the microbreweries all sort of pop up. And I think now they account for 10 to 15% by volume of certainly the US beer market. And of course, they're more expensive. So what's that, like 25% of the market?
But it's pretty significant.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think we've seen a similar thing with, people going, oh, I love an action movie. I love special effects. I love a sequel. I want more, let's say, Star Wars, but give me more Star Wars films. It's too long. And you give them all this stuff. And then they go, oh, God, feeling a bit saturated, to be honest. Like, it's a bit like, if you told a kid in the 90s that you'd have a device on your TV where you could download seemingly endless amounts of box sets of movies, you'd say, well, I'm never going to get bored. I'm never going to leave my bedroom. I'll never get a job. I'll just sit here. Whereas the reality is the internet's full of memes and people saying, I can't find anything I want to watch.
Yeah, you spend more time just like scrolling through than actually watching something.
Exactly. And I think there's a couple of exceptions that kind of prove this rule a little bit in terms of, say, something like James Bond, which, always seems like too long between James Bonds. But, that is partly why the interest is still there. And so, I think there's examples that do highlight that there's just a bit of a saturation, perhaps, of sort of Hollywood style content, similar to what's been seen in other industries with other products. And it's nothing unique to our industry.
But it's definitely, you want to find that line between experimenting and diversifying and not just doing the throw spaghetti at the wall and kind of hope some of it sticks. So what's the spaghetti at the wall in cinemas? I mean, what are we looking at in terms of cinemas here and all the different things that we're seeing cinemas experiment with?
So it seems like every idea and thought I have, I can basically trace back to Yoan Allen, who is amazing. And I remember having a conversation with him about 10 years ago, and he was highlighting the breadth and interest of content of studios, say, outside of Hollywood, and how well they're doing, and he was one who really got me thinking a bit about how the content is perhaps at times a bit generic. It's very good at providing these big blockbuster films, and if they can provide 75 to 80% of the box office that the cinemas need, I mean, I think they should be applauded for that. They should be given medals. I think it's wonderful. But it's not 100% of it. And so, it's interesting, looking at, say, Japanese box office, so box office for movies that were made in Japan, depending on your source, but certainly my source to say 22 and 23 beat 2019. Nollywood, 22 and 23 beat 2019. Bollywood, 22, 23 beat 2019. I mean, there's a bit of a pattern here.
Specifically in Europe, I mean, we're talking about in the CineEurope series, some of those countries had their best summers ever over this past year.
Yeah, well, I think a part of it is a little bit of a unique problem that the US has, because of course, Hollywood is in America, so Hollywood is the domestic content. So as these other countries, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Oh, you know what? We'll pick Hollywood films. That'll do 75% of our ticket sales, and then we'll do a bunch of domestic content. That'll take care of another 20, and then the remaining 5 will be international, something like that. And so on. I think if you look at, just businesses in general, I mean, this is kind of where the fun bit is if the cinemas really focus on Hollywood movies and they're not really the bottom line perhaps isn't thriving for their cinema, then, this is the exciting bit. You get to reinvent part of your cinema. You get to break something that's already broken. You just pull it apart and do something different with it. And I think, this is where something like that sort of bright spot analysis can come in, where you sort of look at which cinemas are doing well. And, you can see them. Certainly if you've got access to ComScore, you can. But, you can look on their websites, you can go and visit them. You can go and experience it. You can look at their schedules every single day. You can go through to the booking page and see how many seats are sold for different types of performances. I mean, there's an enormous amount of research you can do into this stuff. I mean, really try to sort of fall in love with cinema again. I mean, like really engage with the other content that could be out there. And memberships is a huge part of that. People aren't necessarily that rational. People like belonging to clubs, whether it's a swim club as a kid or a friend group, a class, a job, whatever it might be. Humans don't necessarily see a membership as a financial transaction. We're not rational. It becomes like a part of your way of life. Like, crazy as it sounds, if you had a dating profile, you might put on there, I go to cinema every month. I love movies. I love foreign movies. I love whatever movies it might be. And, it's not just I go to cinema every 3 or 4 months. And that's, it's part of sort of their life. And so I think it's more cinemas should be doing membership. And if you're not doing a membership system, you should seriously think about it. It doesn't have to be a super complex offering. Some can be quite conservative. So let's say your ticket's keep the maths easy. Let's say a ticket's $10, and so you say, right, for $60 you can get a membership today, includes 6 tickets, so it pays for itself on day one, and you get 10 or 20% off concessions, whatever you want to do. Of course, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Everyone thinks they're going to go to the cinema 3 times, or that they will enjoy it, and they'll commit. This will be part of their new lifestyle choice. And so you brought them in, you've got them thinking about that. They're now sort of bought into that idea, and they should be coming back now later in the year. And you haven't had to give the earth to do that. Other things to think about is, you leverage your loyalty data. If you're collecting loyalty data, you're not using it, then frankly, you're almost
why are you collecting it?
I mean, Yeah. I mean, and there's loads of books full of ideas on this. You've got, I think, a Nudge. You've got Atomic Habits. For anyone who hasn't read Loyalty 3.0 and is involved in cinema marketing, thoroughly recommend it. Go and buy it today. But yeah, it's all about using CRM and membership to create habits. Other things to think about is, there's that sort of, if, for example, the trailers that you show are predominantly for films that are within, say, 90 days, then if someone hasn't been in 90 days, you're getting those automated emails out sharing trailers and so on, because you need that, because they don't know what you're playing. So yeah, what we come across is a lot is, say, a time issue, and that's why I think the software has to take over. It needs to make a lot of this automated. Our customers sending out, say, automated trigger emails based on behaviors and so on. If you are showing, say, a breadth of content, and of course, if you're maintaining film studio payments in a spreadsheet, then now if you show twice as many films, then you've just doubled the amount of work. And if you show 5 times as many as some of our customers are, then it goes up exponentially. So if your POS has like a film payments module like ours does, then it just automates and simplifies that stuff. For profitability reports, you need to be able to see how profitable all your concessions are with the click of a button. You need to do year-on-year comparisons, and you need to be able to do it without spending hours digging through data. It should be click on it, check it, make some adjustments, and go on with your day. And so this has very much been where we've been focusing, where I think cinemas who are doing that are really, really benefiting.
Yeah, I mean, just having the membership program and collecting that loyalty data, really isn't enough. It's then the communication that you have and making it kind of a more personable experience. And it's good to have something like a POS system like TAPOS that can handle the data and kind of parse things so you can focus on the human element. I mean, it's so important, I think, to look at other industries and to look. I mean, CineEurope, you're interacting with people from all sorts of different countries who have all sorts of different ways of doing things, and it's really key to be able to, because, like you said, the problems they're general and specific problems that we have. They can fall into the same general rubric, but through talking with other people at these shows, or talking with TAPOS by Jack Rowe, booth 3112, CineEurope, you're able to kind of get the brain working. If you can do that after you maybe stayed up too late the night before at one of the various parties. Is there anything else as we look forward to CineEurope that you'd like to mention?
I think as a lot of my friends, naturally with, me running a software business, a lot of my friends run software businesses. And I was chatting with CEO of BuzzShot the other day, this guy, Tom Parslow, and he was saying how, so he does software for escape rooms, not to see that much of ticketing, it's mostly the sort of social media engagement side and so on. And, he was saying, for an escape room, they might add another escape room after maybe 18 months. So you've got one product to sell for 18 months, and if you look at something like fashion,
it might be branded around like a movie, and if that particular movie maybe isn't doing so well, you still have that themed escape room like 6 weeks down the line. I mean, I know that we don't have the robust slate that we used to, but we are getting back to it.
But it's a slate. So like, a coffee shop, you've got different flavors of coffee, sure, but I mean, it's not a huge difference, but we have new content available for our cinemas, for our screens every single week, and it's just this rich treasure trove of stuff to mine. And there are other industries who give their they would die for this volume and variety of content. There's lots of great things about this industry, and I think that there is more. And we're seeing a real difference between those of our customers who are engaging with that and those who haven't yet. So I would encourage everyone to speak to their pulse provider and find out what they can do, not just us, but who you're with, and see what can be done. Take away from today, it's like just get that membership thing out there, start engaging with those customers, find out what they want to see, start building some habits. If there's a local film club, maybe engage with them. You can maybe involve them in the programming, get them to do some of the work involved. There are easier ways into this. And as I say, the membership deal doesn't have to be this kind of huge risky sacrifice. It can be something which you're not really risking very much at all.
Yeah, I mean, you go to a coffee shop and you swipe your card and you just sign up for a membership with them through the POS, through the tablet. So it should be more widespread in this industry than it is. And for those who would like to hear more about how to do that, why to do that, how it is not such a daunting proposition as it may seem, please visit TAPOS by Jack Rowe at CineEurope. They will be on the trade show floor in booth 312, or you can go to TAPOS, or you can go to TAPOSapp.com. There we go. TAPOSapp.com to find out more information, see a demo, get in touch with Alan.
And we're at Art House Convention as well, week following. So just a bit of a shout out to them. It's a great event.
They changed their name. It's Index now, but it's the new Art House for Convergence. It's going to be in Chicago, I think a week after CineEurope.
Thank you. Yeah. I still find myself calling CinemaCon Show West. So I just, it'll take me a while.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Rebecca.
Awesome. Thank you.
ICE Theaters, the market's most immersive and high-end premium format. Because the light shall be treated like sound coming from everywhere. Discover the ICE Theaters experience and embark on an immersive odyssey beyond reality. ICE Theaters. Meet us at CineEurope, booth 107.
And we are joined here on the Box Office podcast by Clare Binns of Picturehouse Cinemas in the UK and its distribution arm, Picturehouse Entertainment. Clare, thank you for being on the podcast.
So great to speak with you, given your 40 years in the industry, specifically, working with neighborhood cinemas and championing world cinema and independent cinema. It's something that I personally am really passionate about, and I'm kind of curious to pick your brain. So I'm gonna jump right in there. Over the last couple of years, there's been, I think, definitely an increased awareness and more talk of, we need that mid-budget film. We need to support them. We went through a period where obviously we had a very spare slate, and I think it kind of, was a little bit of a come to Jesus moment for the industry as to we need to support more films and different types of films. Do you feel like the industry in Britain specifically or on a whole, do you feel like enough is being done in that respect?
The blockbusters are one thing and the small art house films are another thing. But it is absolutely those mid-range films that I think cinemas need. I think audiences also, because, if you look at the way a director has a career, and I mean, take the example of Rose Glass, who started off with a small art house film with St. Maud and now has made a bigger film, Love Lies Bleeding, which sort of fits in that middle band. And I just think it's a way for directors to grow. It's a way for audiences to grow. It's a way that cinemas have enough films going through them. There's something really for everyone. So I think there's been a real loss of those mid-range films. I believe they're coming back. I think the writers and directors strike obviously had an impact on that. So it meant that a lot of those films were cancelled or delayed, and they will be coming through in 2025. So I believe that we do need those films. Those films are out there. And I think also it's about the streamers working with exhibition. I think everybody now realises that the theatrical experience and the window does no harm to streaming, and streaming can do no harm to exhibition. So it's just about us all finding that sweet spot.
Yeah, and filmmakers are realizing that, there was all the kind of hubbub and concern during, the area of a slimmer slate. Are people going to get used to watching these movies on Netflix or on streaming, and audiences and filmmakers, I think, have realized, no, they're just going to kind of get dumped there and not promoted unless you're Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, there's definitely what we've all learned. And it is, cinema has been so much transition from silent to sound, TV coming in, DVD coming in, digital coming in. It's been a constant changing environment. And what certainly I think everybody knows is people will always want to gather together to see films, to see theatre, to see music. It's not the same as being at home. Being at home is very nice, but it's a different experience. And while people do want to be together, they want those films to be able to see them. And I certainly think now that the experience of the pandemic and everybody sitting at home, it has taken time. It has taken time. People have had to recalibrate their lives, and streamers have had to look at what works for them and doesn't work. So I'm feeling very positive about the future for cinema.
Mm-hmm. I just love all the crises that the cinema industry has endured, that we're gonna, DVDs were gonna kill the industry, and before that VHS, and before that radio, and it's still such a young industry, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit over 100 years old. So what is very clear is that you look at the big Hollywood directors that are working today, they by and large have come up by making small and mid-range films. Directors make films to be seen in the cinema. That's where they want their films to be shown. And it doesn't mean that we just have to change the offer and the way we show them and the way that we can work with all the different platforms in order to make it work for audiences, because the audiences are the ones that drive this whole business, not us.
My brain goes to one of my favorite filmmakers, like a person like Guillermo del Toro. Now he's a name, he's a marquee, he's a draw on his own. But then if you look back at like those earlier films, like a Devil's Backbone or something like that, he wasn't particularly known outside of the film geek sphere, and he didn't have any stars, I think, that were particularly known in that film. What are the challenges? I feel like we're in an inflection point with marketing some of these mid-range independent films. Like, you have marketing departments on the studio side and the exhibitor side. The resources aren't there anymore. Print magazines are not there anymore. Let's just say a lot of it's moved to social media. How do you feel about the way we're trending in that direction in terms of the ability to market these films?
Well, I mean, clearly, we have a distribution arm, a film distribution arm, and we have our cinemas and we have our marketing team for both. I think there's much more cross-pollination between the marketing. So, we work very closely with distributors on the smaller films, and we have to find ways to reach our audiences directly, which we do. And of course, it would be great if we had great budgets for the smaller films to market those films. But I think digitally, people are finding their information very differently than they did 10, 15 years ago. And again, I think that all marketing has digital is just another way of being able to reach audiences. But I think the other thing I would say, and what we're finding more and more, is that repertory is becoming quite important, because there's people who are in their 20s that have not seen a lot of the classic films in cinemas. And actually, there are audiences who want to see a Martin Scorsese film like Taxi Driver, or, just a film that they may have only ever seen on a Netflix or on an Amazon, and they actually want to come and see it in a big cinema on a screen, and we are showing probably more repertory films than we've ever shown.
I'm thinking of something like Zulawski's Possession. I don't know. Was that really re-released in the UK? Because that did create so many young people were like, what is this movie?
Yeah. Well, I think we're finding that younger people just want to see those films in cinemas. And so we're making them available so that we can do that. I mean, again, it's one of those things that you have to market them. You have to make sure that people know those films are out there. But there's a huge appetite for cinema for younger people.
There's been a lot of hand-wringing about how are we going to get the younger people back in cinemas, and it turns out just show good movies. And
show good movies. Yeah, which has always been the case. That hasn't changed. You know, you show good movies, you show it in a comfortable environment on a nice big screen. And a nice big screen, you know, when I talk about people seeing films in cinemas, and you can have a great experience watching a film with 10 people at 12 noon on a Tuesday afternoon as you can on an opening night of a big film which is completely sold out. I think it's more that you're in sharing a space. The lights have gone down, you've turned your phone off, you're concentrating on the film, and there may only be a few of you in there, but it is this shared experience that is like no other.
What have you been most successful, I guess, in marketing some of those smaller, quirkier titles and in building back, habitual moviegoing? People who were willing to take a risk on something and try something out, even if it's not their typical.
Well, we at Picturehouse, we had a strand which we called Discover, and we also have the Film Club. And the Film Club is at an affordable price, as is Discover. And it's what we do is we will, in the Discover, be previewing smaller films. And in Film Club, it could be classics or part of a season. But I think what I'm very proud of at Picturehouse, and this is not me, this is just all the team of people that work there, is that we, I think, have our audience's trust so that they will, when they come to a Discover film, we will have programmed something that will, I mean, they may not say it's the best film they've ever seen, but it will be
it was worth seeing.
It's worth seeing, and it will be something that they will say it's the best film they've ever seen. But we program our cinemas, we curate our cinemas. They are not just the biggest film out that week. It is a mixture of all sorts of things so that our audiences will feel that we are doing a job for them, that we are saying these are the films that we think will entertain you, that will challenge you, that will inform you.
It will confuse you, but in a good way.
So that we've been doing for a very long time. And it's it is absolutely what we are as a group of cinemas. And, every cinema is slightly different in what it's playing and when it's playing it, because we try and tailor make it for the audience that come to our sites.
And then you have the film festivals as a whole different side of the equation, and you can work together so well to kickstart that discovery process.
Yeah.
I mean, when I go to a festival, I don't want to see something that's coming out in a month anyway.
Yeah.
I want to see something that I have no clue what it is.
Yeah. I mean, when the films we bought as Picturehouse Entertainment last year in Cannes were, we bought Anatomy of a Fall, which has turned out to be a huge success. We bought The Taste of Things with Juliette Binoche. We bought Correa's Monster. I mean, the variety of films that we bought as Picturehouse Entertainment, and Rosalie, which is coming out shortly, where we've always made sure that we've got a very diverse, interesting range of films that I think audiences will be keen to see.
So I know you started in the cinema industry as an usher. Do you remember the first, the first film that you saw in a cinema, or?
Not really. I mean, I know that there were films that had a big impact on me. West Side Story had a big impact on me. The Red Shoes had a big impact on me. When I think the thing about when I first started work in a cinema, and it was at the Ritzy in Brixton, we were showing, it was mainly a repertory cinema. I mean, we did show features every week, but it was, again, 35 millimeter. We showed, I don't know, between 10 and 14 different films a week, and I would catch as many of them as I possibly could. So, it was where I discovered Tarkovsky and Herzog and just Vendors and all those amazing American directors, John Waters with Divine, etc. So, that was my film education, just being able to see all those amazing films. And in a way, that's what I've always wanted our cinemas to do, is to be able to show people so that if they want to see the great films that have been made now or being made now or have been made in the past, that people have an opportunity to be able to see them.
That's become a growing conversation as well, that films like Anyone But You, or even looking back, something like The Greatest Showman or something, films will hold. Like there's the films are good and the experience is good. The word of mouth will get there. Not always. I mean, sometimes things happen, but I mean, how do you, I guess, approach promoting films that are maybe 3-4 weeks in, but you believe that they still have fuel in the tank there?
Well, I mean, it's looking at the numbers, and I think what digital has allowed us to do is to be very flexible. So, a film like the Hamaguchi film, Evil Does Not Exist, which is a tiny little film, but if you pick your right shows each week, there's an audience for it. And when it was 35 mil, it was much more difficult. But now you can sort of slot things in around and about. You can keep things going. I mean, I've taken off Anatomy of a Fall at Central. It played for 26 weeks, and it played increasingly on different shows. They gradually reduced, but you can, all the people that work at Picturehouse sort of say, okay, well, this show does particularly well for this audience. We can play it at 9:00 on a Tuesday night and it will get 40 people in or 30 people in, and that's worth it. And so you can be much more able to keep films on, which we do. We're very much about letting films breathe and not just taking them off if they're working, and to find a way where you can thread them through all the other films.
I always feel for the programmers like, oh my gosh, everything's 2.5 hours, 3 hours, 3.5 hours now.
Not
Like that's got to
easy.
be
Not easy. No.
a tough logistical puzzle.
Yeah, but again, it's just sort of finding, you become very adept, and all the programmers at Picturehouse become very adept at how they can sort of just put, like a jigsaw puzzle, put films around.
It's like film Tetris.
And keep them going. Yeah, it is like film Tetris. And, again, films that did well for the Oscar run, Poor Things, etc. I mean, people kept that going for ages. That there were even like, or even the Bob Marley film that kept in some cinemas would get odd shows here and there for weeks and weeks and weeks. And it is now much easier to do that. And audiences do seek them out. They don't, particularly for the smaller films, they don't rush out. You rush out and see Planet of the Apes, or you rush out and see The Fall Guy. But
like I have my Furiosa ticket, but other things,
Yeah, so the Hamaguchi, the the smaller films, people don't rush out and see them. So you just have to find a way to thread them through so that those people can still find them when they want to.
I mean, the Picturehouse, you play like pretty much, I think, the whole gamut, the kind of the bigger budget tent poles, and then the smaller mid-budget independent and international cinema and rep cinema. Would you say, is there a typical?
Well, I mean, it depends on the film that you're playing. I mean, I would say the audience that we probably don't have is the sort of 15 to 20-year-old. I would say that is the audience we don't particularly have. But then we have probably a slightly older audience. But again, we've seen that older audience getting younger after the pandemic. I think the older audience we had, and then we went into COVID, and that audience was quite reluctant to come out again. They were much more nervous. And then I think our audience got younger, and our audience has continued to be younger. But actually now the older audience have come back again.
I mean, with those younger segments, is it because you're playing the same films in many cases as a multiplex? Is it just a matter of they're seeking out the IMAX and the big kind of spectacular premium formats?
Well, I think the people that come to us just like the Picturehouse experience. They like to be in a building that is showing, we'll be showing Furiosa, but we'll be showing Hitman, the Richard Linklater film, and where they can get a lovely cup of coffee and they can have a nice piece of cake and some mochi ice cream and popcorn if they want it, and a pizza and
it's
a
lunchtime,
lovely glass of wine. I mean, people love the fact that they get really good beer and wine with us, and they can take that in as they can take in their pizza, and they can, enjoy the film with a nice glass of Merlot.
And that was Clare Binns, the managing director of Picturehouse Cinemas and Picturehouse Entertainment, and recipient of this year's Unique Achievement Award at CineEurope 2024. Earlier, you heard from Alan Rowe, CEO of Jack Rowe. And to learn more about Jack Rowe, please stop by their booth. That is booth number 312 over at CineEurope. You can find Alan and his team there to talk to you a lot more about the technology they have in store. Don't miss next week's episode when I will be back to speak a little bit more on CineEurope, and we'll be joined by more special guests from the event, including a special interview with Jack Klein from Cinity. Jack Klein was heavily involved in the digital transition with Christie for years. He's got a new project right now, leading a new PLF concept like Cinity in theaters worldwide that is coming up in next week's episode. On behalf of myself, Rebecca Pauley, and everyone else here on Box Office Pro, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you again next week.